Chimpanzees are humankind's closest living relative, sharing over 98% of our DNA.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
just
feeding on
just
it.
one of them? Or
Yeah.
there's a few? I can see some movement, but I can see only one.
Science has revealed just how much we share with them, yet, at the same time, human action is causing their numbers to plummet. I set out to discover the reality of what is happening to chimps across their natural habitat in Africa and explore the depth of their connection with humankind. This is the story of chimpanzees on our planet now. Dr. Shadra Kamenya is the Director of Conservation Sciences at the Jane Goodall Institute in Tanzania, and my guide to a rare glimpse of chimpanzees in the wild.
Chimpanzees are like us. You cannot predict what they are going to do. Sometimes they do interesting things, and that's why we researchers come and see if something new will be witnessed. They do different things every day.
We are in Tanzania's Gombe Stream Reserve. For scientists and conservationists who work with chimpanzees, this is their mecca. Gombe was put on the global stage in the 1960s by a young woman from London named Jane Goodall.
When I was a little girl growing up in England, I always loved animals and nature. So when I was 10 years old, I decided I will grow up, go to Africa, live with animals, and write books about them. We had no money when I was a child, but I had a wonderful mother, and she said to me, if there's something you really want to do, you're going to have to work very hard and never give up.
When Jane Goodall was 26, she traveled to Tanzania to begin a journey that would forever transform how humans understand chimpanzees and our place on this planet. Jane arrived in Gombe with no professional training as a scientist. Armed with a notebook and an insatiable desire to learn, she began a study of chimpanzees that would last 55 years. Breaking from scientific protocol of the day, she gave all the chimps in her study names rather than numbers. Her observations revealed the complex social structure of chimps communities, illuminating behavior and intelligence that was long thought to be the exclusive domain of humans. Jane's work captivated the world and inspired generations of young scientists and conservationists to follow in her footsteps. A lot has changed since Jane first landed in Gombe. Despite all that we've learned about chimpanzee intellect, emotions, and culture, their numbers are plummeting across Africa. Chimps are facing threats that she could have never imagined when she first arrived.
Back in 1960, were definitely more than 1 million. It was between 1 and 2 million. It's estimated that there are about 300 to 350,000 chimpanzees right across the continent.
In the entire Africa?
In the entire Africa. And of course, many of those are in these small fragmented forests, and small populations like that don't have much hope for long-term survival.
So are we facing the risk of bringing them to extinction?
If we don't get together and fight, yes, they could just go, because they're very slow breeders.
Like humans?
I'm afraid if we breed too fast. Chimps, 1 baby every 5 years, and high infant mortality. Not like humans. One thing chimpanzees have not done that we have is overpopulate their environment. And we're losing them all the time.
Wow. Such a beautiful animal. It's amazing to see them in the wild, huh? It's right there. He's looking at us, actually. He was. And the little kid is coming too.
Going very fast. Now the baby will come down too.
Oh, really?
And yeah. Look good to watch the baby. You see the baby.
Now he's down.
Maybe.
Look at him. The babies are so beautiful, huh? It's so similar to us.
In the past 40 years, the Earth has lost about half of its wildlife. 80% of the Earth's natural forests are gone. 1/5 of the world's coral reefs are dead. and species are disappearing from the planet at a rate 100 times faster than normal. The last time we had a mass extinction like this, it ended the domination of the dinosaurs. At the root of all this destruction lies one species, humanity. Chimps have not been immune from this devastation, with their numbers plummeting by about 80% over the past century. The largest threat to chimpanzees in the wild is habitat loss, driven by explosive population growth. Shadrach took me to the top of a ridge that overlooks Gombe to see how human development has transformed the area.
When Dr. Jane came, all this area, which is now farmland, it was forest.
All this area?
Yes, it was forested. And most of this disappeared or was made into farmland in 1970s especially, and 1980s to 90s. When Dr. Jane came in 1960, she thought the park had 160 chimpanzees. And currently in the park, we have about 90 chimpanzees. 90. Over the years from 1960 to now, a number of threats have been increasing.
I left the boundaries of Gombe to learn about the threats facing chimpanzees from Shadrach and other people on the front lines of the battle to save them. How many chimpanzees live in this area?
600.
600 chimps in
Yes,
this
chimps
area?
in this area.
So why this area is not protected? In the wild, chimps face a number of serious threats, including habitat loss, poaching, deforestation, mining, and disease. While chimpanzees are protected under CITES and other international treaties, an estimated 75% of all chimps live on unprotected land. As a result, chimpanzee populations have declined dramatically over the past century.
So we know that 6 to 8 million years ago, there was neither humans and neither chimpanzees. There was something that essentially was our common ancestor. And we have since diverged, and now they are our closest relatives.
Alex Peel is an American anthropologist who has been studying chimpanzees in Tanzania for over 20 years. He works in the Masito-Ugala region in Tanzania, an unprotected area where chimpanzees and other wildlife are highly endangered.
There's a lot we can learn about our own history through studying chimpanzees, but it makes the challenge of protecting them more complicated, especially in areas where both humans and chimpanzees are sharing resources.
So you're saying that because they're so close to us, the challenge is bigger?
Yes. Yes.
It should be the other way around.
One would think, but it adds a new dimension to the strategy and to the approach of ways to protect them and way to mitigate threats that we both would face with scarce resources. If you look at the data, if you look at the numbers of chimpanzees, if you look at the satellite imagery of suitable habitat, it's very demoralizing. It's very discouraging, very discouraging, yeah. And so reconciling what you want to be the reality and what the reality is probably the biggest challenge.
How would you feel in a world without chimpanzees?
Empty. It would be an empty world.
Not far from Alex's camp, we got a first-hand glimpse of the challenges facing chimpanzees that live on unprotected land. Mary Mavanza is the director of the Masito-Ugala Ecosystem Program of the Jane Goodall Institute. She works with local communities to promote a sustainable coexistence with chimpanzees and their natural environment.
It's been burnt by people who are encroaching for different reasons. Some of them ban because they want to have new growth of grass so they can feed their cattle. It is illegally because it's not allowed, but because it's a general land, it's like, no one is watching, so everybody will do what they want.
As more humans have moved into the area, fires are happening more frequently than the natural cycles can support.
Every year you pass by here, you see fire. It's very destructive, very destructive. This general land is very big, and also it's not monitored. No one is watching what is happening here.
Not surprisingly, these burning have a negative effect on the area's wildlife, including chimpanzees.
They don't want to live in open space like this, so they would run away and hide somewhere else. But also what we are seeing around is the habitat for them. There is where they find their food, there is where they live, there is where they make their nests. So they run away. And if they squeeze themselves into a small place, the life there becomes very difficult and some of them die.
In the same 100 years that the chimpanzee population declined by about 80%, the human population in Africa increased by about 700%. And the Kigoma region around Gombe is no exception. In 1967, Kigoma had a human population of about 470,000. Today, it has over 2 million people. Everything from cattle ranching to small roadside charcoal production is cutting into the habitat that chimpanzees depend on for their survival. Sadly, the people responsible most often live in extreme poverty and are simply trying to obtain the resources they need to survive. I traveled to a nearby village with Shadrach to see how human population growth is impacting chimps.
We are about 2 to 2.5 kilometers away from the chimpanzee habitat. With more people, you need more food, you need more farmland. They also need the resources from the forest. And some people may decide to kill individuals, chimpanzees, by chance, by fear. When I'm hungry, all I need is food. And when I need water, all I need is water. So for them, when you talk about chimpanzees, it's not the message they want to hear. But we also need to figure out how to support them. So if we find another way to improve their socio-economics here, for not relying on the forest, for farmland, for firewood, then it's possible to save the chimpanzee habitat, not only here, even in other places.
While the fight to protect chimpanzees in the wild is underway in Africa, activists in the United States are working to protect the ones that live in captivity.
Joe lived for 17 years in a chain-link dog pen. He could barely take a few steps in either direction, and he was completely alone. When you deny these animals everything that's natural and important to them, they essentially lose their minds.
One of Jane's most important discoveries at Gombe was witnessing chimps exhibit a behavior that was thought to be exclusively human: making and using tools. Everything changed when Jane saw David Greybeard, a chimp, breaking the leaves off of twigs and then using them to dig termites out of the ground to eat. After learning of this discovery, Jane's mentor, Dr. Louis Leakey, famously said, "Now we must redefine tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as humans." Chimpanzees and humans differ by less than 2% of their DNA. Chimps laugh when tickled, shake their head to say no, fight when aggravated, and reconcile with an embrace and a kiss. In captivity, they continue to demonstrate their similarity with humans, developing signs of depression, PTSD, and other psychiatric disorders. Perhaps it is our similarity to them that has led to their exploitation.
Joe was born in 1989. He was born in captivity. For the first 10 years of his life, he lived with a notorious animal trainer cited by the USDA for horrible abuses of great apes and other animals.
Brittany Pitt is the director of captive animal law enforcement at PETA. As a lawyer and animal rights activist, she fights to free animals held in immoral or unlawful captivity. I met with her at Save the Chimps, the world's largest chimpanzee sanctuary, where hundreds of chimps live out their days in as close to the wild as possible.
When he was 10, he transferred Joe to the Mobile Zoo in Alabama, and Joe lived there for 17 years in a chain-link dog pen. He could barely take a few steps in either direction, and that was his life for 17 years, and he was completely alone. When you deny these animals everything that's natural and important to them, they essentially lose their minds.
The reality is that Joe's case is all too common, with close to 1,000 chimpanzees still living in biomedical facilities and unlicensed zoos throughout the United States. In 2015, the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife announced that the Endangered Species Act will be expanded to include all chimpanzees, both captive and in the wild. This gave Brittany and PETA the ammo they needed for cases like Joe's.
We've been fighting on behalf of Joe. The first thing that we did on the day that captive chimpanzees became protected, we initiated an Endangered Species Act lawsuit on behalf of Joe.
Within 3 months of filing the lawsuit, Brittany was able to secure Joe's release. She traveled to Alabama to join him on his journey to save the chimp sanctuary in Fort Pierce, Florida.
We found out the day before that Jane was going to be in Gainesville, Florida for a speaking engagement. So we worked it out. We met Jane at her hotel, and Jane was able to spend time with Joe, talking to him and observing him. We arrived at Save the Chimps late that night. Joe was released into his temporary indoor quarantine enclosure, and the first thing that he did was climb. And he'd been denied the opportunity to do that for at least 17 years, maybe for his whole life.
In the 5 months that Joe has been living at Save the Chimps, his life has been completely transformed.
Wow. That's Joe. Yeah, that's Joe. When he was rescued, his forearms and his calves were completely bald, and most of the hair has grown back.
It has been months since Brittany last saw him.
It's incredible. He looks like a different chimp. He just looks like a completely different chimp. He's completely transformed in just 5 months, not only physically, but socially. By bringing these lawsuits on behalf of captive chimpanzees is just bringing light to how intelligent these animals are and how social and how unique they are. That helps us to prevent wild chimpanzees from ever being imported into the United States again. Hopefully it also helps encourage people to support conservation efforts to keep chimpanzees in the wild. They have a chance if we really want to save them.
Chimpanzees have feelings like we do. They have personalities. They feel happiness. They can be angry. They can be vindictive. But they also have love and compassion.
The ecosystem that supports them is the ecosystem that supports us. If they go, then what next? Maybe it's us.
The threats facing chimpanzees have never been greater. And the challenges facing conservationists can often feel impossible. Jane believes that educating and empowering the youth of today is essential for saving the environment of tomorrow. In 1991, Jane launched an organization called Roots and Shoots from a classroom in Tanzania. Today, Roots and Shoots has grown to have chapters in over 130 countries and nearly 150,000 youth members.
55 years ago, I went to Gombe and started studying the chimpanzees. And my best days of my whole life were when I was out in the forest by myself with the chimpanzees. So the reason I left the life I love is because I found out that chimpanzee numbers were dropping. And I went to other parts of Africa, DRC and over there, and it was the same everywhere.
While the situation for chimps might be dire, the sight of these children enraptured by Jane's story is one reason for hope.
We live in a world where everything is interconnected, and every species has some role to play. We're just beginning to discover there's an awful lot we have left to learn. And chimpanzees, in a way, in this part of the world, are symbolic. If chimpanzees disappear, that means that we're not protecting the wildlife in the forest. And we never know when a species disappears what knockoff effect that will have. And there are examples of one species going, and that can lead to the destruction of a whole ecosystem. So these are the kind of things that's important for the children to learn. But also, chimpanzees have feelings like we do. They have personalities. They're highly intelligent. They have emotions. And that's really important. It's not just the chimpanzees, it's other animals too.
They feel pain and fear.
They feel pain, they feel fear, they feel happiness. They can be angry, they can be vindictive. They can make war of a sort, but they also have love and compassion and altruism.
Jane's work continues to inspire people around the world. But as the threats facing chimpanzees continue to grow, saving them is becoming increasingly difficult.
The only reason that chimpanzees like Joe continue to be held in roadside zoos is because people continue buying tickets to roadside zoos. If the public took a stand and stopped supporting these industries, we could end this tomorrow.
If we work hard, if the people, if the government will understand and see the value of chimpanzees and chimpanzee habitat, then the chimpanzees will continue to be there even 200 years from now. The ecosystem that supports them is the ecosystem that supports us. If we let the forest go, it means also our watershed, our rivers, our streams will also suffer. If they go, then what next? Maybe it's us, it's the human species that will go.
They're important to learn about the history of our own species, where we came from, how we got here. They're important because they're a charismatic species, and if you protect a keystone species like chimpanzees, lots of other animals are protected along the way. They're important to protect for the intrinsic value that they're another wild animal, and so in some ways they're just as important as lots of other species. But because they're an indicator species, if chimpanzees are there, it's highly likely lots of other species are there. That's a good reason to protect the entire habitat.
I think if we lose the chimps, about whom we're still learning, we sort of lose a little piece of understanding of our own evolution. And they are our closest genetic relative. That's symbolic of something. Our humanity is diminished because we don't care.